There are a lot of things that they like about Caleb Clark for that All Black left wing spot. But Kini Naholo, to me,
yeah, he played well.
He was unstoppable.
Yeah, he was.
Remember Emmett Smith used to play for the Dallas Cowboys?
I do.
I'm thinking Emmett Smith.
And he killed us in the NFC East for years, yeah.
We talk a lot about attendances, things like creating the sense of an event is really important in sport at the moment when you're trying to get people through the gate. And that's exactly what they did. He's just such a creative player. I think 8 is where I'd like to see him. You know, like in the way that Zinzan Brook used to just create so much.
DSPN, the Devlin Sports Podcast Network.
Round 11 and plenty to talk about, just 5 rounds to go and anything's still possible apart from the top 2. And you've got to say that the Chiefs and the Crusaders 8-2, 37 points and a couple of wins ahead of everyone else. Thus, cement. I mean, let's agree on that, Tone, before we start.
Well, it's looking that way. There's a gap there now, and I think we're getting 3 distinct battles going on here at the moment. You've got that battle for pole position. I think we know who's going to be on the front row of the grid, but pole position going to be very important.
Probably decided in Christchurch, although...
Yeah, who knows what could happen between now and then, because there's still that air of unpredictability about it. Then you've got 3 and 4, and it's looking like the Reds and the Brumbies, even though the Brumbies lost at the weekend, they're battling it out. That's a really important one to have too, because of that format that we were talking about last year. Because if you lose 3 and 4, that game, there's still a chance you stay in. So, and then you've got 6 teams fighting for the last 2. That's wide open, and the results of last weekend have certainly underlined that, how wide open it is. And I think what we're going to see this coming weekend is going to be very telling. Just 2 or 3 of the games you got lined up, they are the teams. These are like golf's 2-shot swings.
Yeah, exactly right. Look, and especially that Blues Force game on Friday night kicking it off. And, you know, the Blues, let's park the Blues. I want to talk about the Hurricanes to start with, because to me that is the result of the weekend. And also, Tony, the performance of the weekend, it wasn't a smash and grab raid. They played really well and actually held them off at the end. And because those, you know, if you look at that score and go, okay, it's, just let me check here, it was 29-35. Okay, so it, you know, look as if you didn't know the game. Oh, maybe the Brumbies were within a try. But the Hurricanes controlled that last few minutes and were up their end looking to actually score another try themselves. I thought it was a really take care of business performance from the Canes, which we just haven't seen consistently enough all year.
Yeah, and on a couple of levels. Firstly, just in terms of the character of the team, because they would have been disappointing with the outcome from the game in Perth. They should have won that game. They know it. And that's a draw to them felt like a loss, where it probably felt like a minor victory in context to the Force. So character, that's one, and you need to show a ton of that if you're going to win in Canberra, because it's a hard place to win. We all know that. It's a gnarly sort of a place, a bit of a feral crowd there getting in the referee's
cold
ear
as hell,
and all that. Yeah. So character. But I think the execution, you know, we'll talk about the backs in a moment, because, you know, that back line was sensational, but the forwards got to do the job. And if they do the job and they just create that little bit of time and space for Roygaard, then he runs the game. He creates things, you know, he keeps your opposition guessing all the time. Ruben Love, you know, playing really well in the 10 jersey, but I thought the key to it was that midfield fulcrum. And firstly, Billy Proctor, a lot of talk about Billy, and if he keeps playing that way, then he's putting up a compelling case to have that All Black number 13 jersey for the test against France, because he is getting that little bit of time and space that Rieko Ioane is not getting at the Blues at the moment. But I think for him to function like that, a lot depends on what's going on inside him, and don't underestimate the importance of the return of Riley Higgins. I really rate this guy. He's big, he's strong, but he just, as well as using that well, he created that little bit of time and space for the guys outside him. And when they bring that back 3 into play, those sweeping backline movements, they can make simple look fantastic, but they also can just create mayhem. And the other standout, again, who, you know, we know Caleb Clark. There are a lot of things that they like about Caleb Clark for that All Black left wing spot, particularly his ability to reclaim a kickoff, those sorts of things, his speed. But Kini Naholo, to me,
he played well.
He was unstoppable.
Yeah, he was. And look, and when you say you get that front foot ball and that extra half a second of space, him running onto the ball, there's a couple of times there where he was like a bear. They just couldn't actually get around him, could they? They couldn't hold him down and he was just wrestling out of tackles, and it was powerful, wasn't it?
But also looking for work too, and that's always something you want to see from the wingers. And the way he went into that ruck, burst away from there, I was thinking, remember Emmett Smith used to play for the Dallas Cowboys?
I do.
I'm thinking Emmett Smith.
He killed us in the NFC East for years. Yeah, it was. It was really... Look, that to me was the standout result. You were there in Mount Maunganui for the Chiefs versus the Force, and in the end it was a 56-point blowout for the Chiefs. But one outstanding play, which I think was the highlight of the weekend for me, was as the Chiefs guys were sitting around patting each other on the back after scoring a try. The Force kick off. I've never seen a try like that in a game of rugby. Have you? Ever?
Yeah, it caught everyone napping.
Yeah. Cameraman, commentator.
Well, it wasn't look, that's just one of those things. You just don't expect it to happen. And look, there were some questions asked us. Was that legal? Because when you have a quick throw in, for example, to a line out, you have to use the same ball. But I looked through the laws. It was great knowledge of the laws by the Force, because to have a kick-off, and was it a quick kick-off or was it just a kick-off that they took quickly?
I don't know.
Or I think they just caught them napping?
I think the last two, perhaps.
Yeah, and so all that is required is that the opposition all have to be back behind the 10-metre mark, and then
away you go.
Away you go, yeah. And they realised, and they'd done a bit of homework. I think they'd scouted out a couple of things, and I wouldn't mind betting that maybe they'd thought that could be on, that they'd looked at the way the Chiefs sometimes set up out wide, whatever. But firstly, perfectly executed kick. Brilliant speed.
Yeah.
By Harry Potter.
And great skill to get it and get over the line.
But, a little bit wakey.
Yeah.
I don't think the Chiefs will let that happen again.
No,
but, it was remarkable.
Tony, it was a great place to have it over the weekend, wasn't it? That's a really nice part of the world, and every time you go down there, especially if the weather's fine or something, Mount Maunganui is an absolute treat. The Oval I'm always concerned about, because I don't know whether or not you fit a rugby pitch in there and everything, and some people get too far away from the action. But the fact they sold it out and everything else, and the crowd was such an enthusiastic crowd, and I don't know. There's something about it that seemed to fit into this weekend.
Yeah, and look, I think, we talk a lot about attendances, things like creating the sense of an event is really important in sport at the moment when you're trying to get people through the gate. And that's exactly what they did. They capped it at 12,000, which sold out very quickly. They probably could have got another 1,000 or 2,000 in there. In terms of the space, on an oval, we were quite a long way back from the action. A lot of the crowd were, the corporates, they were on a sort of strange sort of an angle. Afterwards, people were very excited about it. The locals are saying, we've got to have more games here. We've got to have 2 or 3. The Chiefs should be based here, and I'm sure it'd be a great place to be based.
Wow, FMG Stadium's a hell of a stadium itself.
Yeah. Look, to me, it's the best rugby stadium, purpose-built rugby stadium in the country at the moment. There's just those other things. I think, have a game there. Pick one of the long weekends. Have a game there every year. It'll be a winner. But it was a great night, and it was a really good performance too by the Chiefs. There's something about the way they kick into gear in the second half, and once they get it going, they are unstoppable. Yeah,
it was flawless almost, wasn't it? They did concede a few points, 22, and they won't be happy about that as always, but they put on 56 easy. Great crowd also, I thought, for Moana versus the Drua. It was so good tuning into that game and seeing that stand full. And this has been a builder throughout the season.
Yeah, they're quite clever the way they concertina the crowd into that front apron.
Yeah. And
it creates the impression that there's a big crowd there. But look, I think it was an important win for Moana Pasifika, because they'd had those 2 really good wins and they dropped a couple, but this one keeps them right in the mix. The Fijian Drua, they are now, I think, consigned to the roles of
they're cast adrift now.
Spoilers. And it's been a disappointing season for them, and we talked about some of the reasons why last week. They've still got an opportunity to impact, but Moana Pasifika, that was a really important win for them. Above all, that keeps them very much in the mix in the middle of that. What are we talking about? 5-6-way battle for 2 spots.
Yeah, or trying to get 5th or 6th. Look, they're away the Highlanders. They get a bye. They've got the Blues, and then they've got the Hurricanes. So the 3 New Zealand teams, and you'd think they're going to have to win 2 out of those 3.
That's a tough way. And so this week's game for both the Highlanders and the Moana it's a really, really important game.
As far as the Blues go, and look, I relegated them out of my rankings a few weeks back. I called them Georgia, they were gone. Then the encouraging performances against the Chiefs, they lose by a point. Against the Crusaders, both those games on a knife edge, they could have won, they didn't win. And then they go to the Reds, and I thought that was perhaps their most disappointing effort in recent weeks. They just, the Reds got off to that rocket start again, and the Blues had it many times, had the ball over the line. They couldn't quite clinch it, and in the end, their scoreline blew out on them, 35-21. They're in a position now where they're going to have to win 4, Tony, and I don't even know if it's going to be enough.
Well, because of what happened above them, remember the Waratahs didn't have a game, the Force lost, and they'll play the Force this week. And that's
again,
huge
that's
for them.
A must-win game, isn't it?
Yeah. And look, I still think they're in the hunt because of what they are facing between now and the end of the season. But I think a couple of things about this. Firstly, it doesn't help your cause, and they might have all been the right decision, but they had, 3-4 tries ruled out by the TMO. But more importantly, they got themselves into scoring position, and we've been seeing this all season. They are not finishing off. They are not getting pay for the time they're spending.
Yeah, in the opposition.
In the opposition red zone.
Yeah.
And look, Vern Cotter said it after the game. The hunger at the moment just isn't there, and I presume he's comparing that to what was going on last year. And I think I said early on in the season, I think they find it quite hard to recreate that just brutal physical intensity, that because, you hurt the opposition, but, it takes a lot to do that. And I think they're just struggling to regain that.
He did say that at the start of the year, Tony. He did say that he thought after the first couple of games that their minds were perhaps not quite on it. Maybe the desperation, they don't have that. Whereas last year they felt they had something to prove. I don't know whether that's there. Who knows? Well, we're all just theorising about this, aren't we?
It could be, because I know Akira Ioane had his critics, but when it come to that close quarter stuff, that ability to bash your way through the defence, he was pretty good at it. Ofa Tongafasi, who's out, he's another one. So, they have had some injuries to deal with, quite a few this year. That might have blunted them as well. But they're just not as effective as they were. But look, the time is now. They've got to win this game. They win that game against the Force. As I say, it's a 2-shot swing. It gets them right, if not in, certainly the cusp of the top 6, and still a chance. But on current form, defending the title, that looks unlikely unless there's a big turnaround and they start taking those chances that they were taking so ruthlessly, so efficiently last year.
I'm looking at the points table in front of me here. A win with a bonus point would put them same points as the Force.
Yeah. And the Force have, had a couple of big losses, which I think the points diff would probably favour the Blues.
Well, this is the crazy thing as well. New South Wales go away the Brumbies this week, and the Brumbies you'd expect maybe to bounce back. A win for the Blues would take them above New South Wales as well.
Yeah.
So there is plenty to play for.
Yeah. As I say, but they've got to earn it.
Yeah. Can they win them all? Can they win all of them?
And the thing is, once you get inside the top 6, then your destiny's in your own hands to a degree, apart from, teams that have still got a bye to come, and that's most of them. But if you're in the top 6, then you control your destiny. If you're outside the top 6 as of now, then not only do you have to win, but you have to rely on a few things elsewhere going your own way.
And you don't want that.
So that's why these games this weekend, for a bunch of teams, are so important.
You look at the Reds, they're away in Fiji. And again, you talked about the Drua, who, and you've said this for weeks, are going to beat teams, right? And that after beating the Blues, see, if the Reds get tipped over again this weekend, it brings them back closer to the pack as well. But I was really impressed with them. I didn't think that they were going to be physical enough to beat the Blues, and in the end, they were. Yeah.
Look, they just haven't quite been as consistent as you'd like to see from a genuine title contender. But I think there's definitely the makings of a really good team there.
That halfback of theirs, mate, he was just making yards, wasn't he?
Oh, he's always been good.
Yeah, well, I was so impressed with him. So, yeah. I mean, they're still there or thereabouts. The other crazy thing is the Reds in New South Wales don't have a bye. Every other team has a bye till the end of the season.
Yeah.
So they've got to play now 5 games, then finals.
Yeah.
And whether that takes its toll
maybe, yeah. It depends who you're playing, I guess. But, yeah, it's nicely set up, isn't it?
Crusaders.
Yep.
Imperious again, weren't they?
Yeah. Really sad to see the injury to Taha Kemara. And there were some injuries at the weekend too, by the way. Just going back to the Chiefs, Anton Leonard-Brown had his arm in a sling at the end of the game.
The talk was
looked like the talk was collarbone.
Okay. Oh.
So that could be out for a bit.
Few weeks, yeah.
So injuries, yeah. But I was going to say that the other thing that I should have mentioned about them, sorry, we'll get back to the Crusaders, but how good was it to see Josh Lord come back looking really good? Mm-hmm. And, of course, Wallace Satiti.
Yeah, well, that was fabulous. And your commentary, when there was one run that he did where he just went scorching up the field, bumping guys off, and that was
There's a step in there, a magnificent offload
Yeah, there was,
to
yeah.
Cortez Ratama, who had a really great game. And bit of shame, poor old Caleb Trask, who's just had so much bad luck in the last year. Looked like he's got a high ankle injury, which is not a good thing.
Well.
But yeah, so getting back to the Crusaders, yeah, Taha Kemara, that's really sad to see him go down because he was growing in that role. It's just going to bring James O'Connor into focus, and boy, that is now looking like a jackpot move, that one.
Well,
Colin Mansbridge, Rob Penny, hat off.
Let's see whether he can play 80 minutes, 80 minutes, 80 minutes and 80 minutes, or whether they put him in that role or not, whether...
Yeah, Rivers Lehana, when he came on, he looked pretty solid as well, but they're humming along really nicely, and they get the weekend off. It's not a bad time to have a bye.
No, and then they play the Chiefs after
yourself,
that.
For that game against the Chiefs. That's going to be huge.
Just in terms of, and this is just a completely off-piste question, should Auckland Rugby be concerned about the crowds that they're getting for the rugby games as opposed to what Auckland FC got again yesterday? Another sellout crowd at Mount Smart. The most consistent crowds all year have been for AFC and for the Warriors, who are getting big crowds every week. Should it be a concern, or is it just what Auckland is at the moment?
Well, firstly, with Auckland FC, this is a populace that has been starved of football ever since the demise of the what were they?
Football Kings and then the Knights.
Yeah. So they've been.
So it's all been down the Phoenix.
Yeah, it's all been about, and so they're lapping it up, and of course Auckland being a real event-focused sort of populace. So whatever's big
and whatever's winning,
people will turn up to it. What they're getting when they get there, and what is unique about them, is a fantastic atmosphere with all the singing and the chanting, and people have got into that. Yep. And it's great to see because that's not a New Zealand thing to do.
No, not normally.
And when you go to the rugby, people, they sit there and they expect things to happen and they respond when they do.
Yep.
They don't, it's the old sing when you're winning thing.
Yep.
They don't get behind the team when they're down, when they really need the crowd to lift them. And I think, rugby could maybe sort of just look at that and say, how can we recreate that here? But as I say, the crowds for the Blues, they were good last year when they were winning. They were good at the start of the season. They're just falling off a bit with them not having such a good year. And of course, you put 15 or 20,000 at Eden Park and it looks empty.
Yeah, that's right.
But again, that's all part of that perception. Wow. It's full. I mean, you were talking about the crowd at North Harbour Stadium looking great. It actually wasn't a very big crowd.
Right, okay, well, it fooled me on the TV.
Yeah, but it looked big.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of that comes into it. But look, if the Blues do get into the playoffs, have some games there, which is a little bit unlikely at the moment. I'm sure the crowds will come back. But no, you've just got to say that the Warriors, they've got this hardcore support, and the bandwagon jumpers, they'll come and go, but the core of supporters there, and as I say, with the football, Auckland FC, they are just creating an atmosphere that we just haven't seen before.
Yeah, it's fun, and
people are
fun
loving
game to go to.
Yeah.
Our best question for last, and I think all of us noticed that there was a number 7 on Adi Savier's back on the weekend.
Yeah.
What do we read into it? Can we read everything into it?
Well, yeah, I've always liked him at 7, and particularly if Satiti comes back strongly, and every indication is that he has, and he's just such a creative player to have at number 8, and that's the best position in the loose forwards.
Even though he's been used at 6?
Yeah, but I think 8 is where I'd like to see him. Because, like in the way that Zinzan Brook used to just create so much, he's got that skill set. And we saw it too, for quite a long time last year from Hoskins Satutu.
Kieran Reid was like that too, wasn't he?
Yeah, but he had that incredible power to go. And so, I like Satiti at 8. I think Artie at 7, fine by me. And then you've got your 6. And there are various options there. You go the big, tall, rangy guy, bit of power about him, like Finau, or even like there's a Cullen Grace, just to pick a name out of someone of that ilk. Or do you go for like a Blackadder or a Jacobson? So they've got options there, right. But right as we speak right now, the idea of Satiti at 8 and Artie at 7, I can't see a problem with that. I think that's potent.
DSPN.